Well, greetings to everyone. Our broadcast continues. You are watching We Are Ukraine, and I am Mikita Mikhailov. And now we are joined in the conversation by Alexander Levchenko. He is a Ukrainian diplomat, ambassador of Ukraine to Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina from 2010 to 2017. My greetings to you, Mr. Alexander.
Sincere greetings to you and the viewers.
Just recently, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, stated that Ukraine will appeal to and convene meetings of the United Nations, the OSCE, UNESCO, if I am not mistaken, also in connection with the latest Russian strike, especially on the territory of the capital. Tell me, to what extent and how can we make the most of these platforms right now? Because, well, regardless of their effectiveness in a diplomatic sense and their influence on Russia, we still need to use the right to call emergency meetings, the right to make appeals, the right to make statements. Well, at the very least, it's another international reminder, not just a reminder, but also pressure, including on those who either aren't helping or are helping too little or not in the way we want, and so on and so forth. How can we make the most of this right now?
Well, first of all, the UN Security Council meeting, where the Russians are present, it's important to hold it because it's the main body, universal, the only one we have, and the universal body of the United Nations, which addresses issues of war and peace, makes decisions and considers these important matters. That is why, of course, we are bringing the issue of the barbaric shelling of Kyiv to the Security Council. In fact, damage has been done to many museums, many cultural monuments. So, as you mentioned, UNESCO here, we have also appealed to them. So the OSCE is an organization that deals with security and cooperation in Europe. Therefore, these issues need to be raised before the international community to document what Russia has done by, in fact, shelling peaceful infrastructure and the capital of Ukraine. That's it. Supposedly in response to, something in a district center in Belgorod region and so on, like when drone operators were eliminated and so on. But the response then is to strike the capital with dozens of ballistic, aeroballistic, hypersonic missiles, and then there's also the Oreshnik and so on. It's clear that Putin is seeking to escalate the war, not to find a peaceful solution. That's why we need to inform our international colleagues about how Russia is acting, that the issue of peace is of absolutely no interest to them. And we need to talk with our allies about how to influence a change in Kremlin policy. Studio.
By the way, Russia, after this attack, through Zakharova, she is the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, and Lavrov there, it seems, commented especially about the conversations with Rubio, Marco Rubio. This is the U.S. Secretary of State. We will also talk about this topic separately now with Mr. Levchenko. So here's the point, Mr. Alexander, that interests me. In their statement from the Foreign Ministry, they called on diplomatic missions, diplomatic institutions to evacuate from Kyiv. But, well, as of the moment of our conversation right now, it seems that not a single diplomatic institution has done anything in terms of leaving Kyiv. Not even the Chinese one, for that matter. It comes off as kind of awkward. Well, is it like the emperor has no clothes, or is there a better way to put it here? Or is it that no one believes your lies, or what?
Well, that was classic intimidation, that's all. And it didn't work. It was like a gesture, as if to say, that's it, we're all here. You should all run away from here. Well, it's not the first time they've done this, but they got a clear response that no one is planning to leave. We are accredited in the capital of Ukraine, and we will continue to work here. Actually, Lavrov complained to Rubio. Why would he complain? Or rather, he warned about what would happen and so on. We need to discuss this topic separately. That's it. So there is no reaction to this blackmail. This is outright blackmail, threats, and so on. Well, Moscow often pursues this kind of policy. So far, it has been ineffective. I hope it stays that way. That's it. And the international community, besides not leaving Kyiv, of course, must respond. Today, we have the start of the summit of foreign ministers of the European Union in Cyprus. It is dedicated precisely to the issues of Ukraine's security and ending the war in Ukraine. I think the ministers there also need to give a concrete response to Putin regarding these actions he is taking against Ukraine, and in fact is almost using weapons of mass destruction against the Ukrainian state. That's why we didn't hand over missiles, strategic bombers, and nuclear weapons in 1994 to 95, and the Russians didn't take on obligations so that this very weapon would be used to destroy us and threaten us. So we need to constantly remind them of this and say that if Russia does not want to fulfill its obligations, then let it withdraw from these agreements. The Budapest Memorandum, from the 200 bilateral treaties where it guarantees our territorial integrity. You must have noticed they haven't withdrawn from a single one, because if they withdraw from even one, then it will be considered by the UN, the OSCE, and so on. Therefore, we need to keep the maximum focus of the international community on these brutal attacks to talk about them. And in fact, to put pressure on Moscow, because only verbal statements and appeals do not affect the Kremlin. Studio.
By the way, let's now go into detail about this conversation between Lavrov and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. From the leaks that are already available in open sources, well, from what I see, the US Secretary of State did not give in either to threats or to those repeatedly mentioned statements about the spirit of anchorage, which obviously already reeks from Moscow with this spirit. We discussed the embassy separately, but apparently there were also requests from Russia to the United States to stop sharing intelligence with us, to stop transferring everything related to weaponry. And apparently the answer was no. Well, are you serious? Moreover, even the accusations that your statements about the regime in Kyiv collapsing are, well, more unfounded than ever, because Ukraine's position is stronger now than it has been in recent years. So when we look at the reality of the situation, won't this entire conversation in the end up manifesting itself for Russia, not just to have a significant downside, but to be as deeply uncomfortable and disadvantageous as possible?
We'll see. We'll see how it turns out. In any case, the US has stopped providing us with financial aid, yes, this year and last year as well. Basically, only some leftovers from previously allocated funds were given to us. Well, intelligence assistance remains. At least that's something the United States of America is still helping us with that. And for now, this cooperation continues. And why should Russia dictate who should share with whom or not share and so on? So we still hope that Rubio will not just relay Lavrov's words to President Trump, but that there will actually be a response to these encroachments, because a brutal attack on Ukraine has taken place. So far, we have not heard any concrete or strong response from Washington, or even any response at all. And we are waiting to hear what will be said now regarding what Lavrov is saying here. Moreover, he talks as if we ourselves are to blame for the fact that they are shelling us, attacking us, and seizing our territories. It is necessary to make assessments, and we are waiting for these assessments, both from Europeans and from our American partners. Studio.
And what do you think, Mr. Alexander, why, after talking with Lavrov, did Rubio not get in touch with Sybiha, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine? Or, well, is it just not in the spirit of Washington to do so, of today's Washington?
Well, unfortunately, that's the situation right now, yes. It wasn't like this before. But for a year and a half now, we've been living in a completely different way. So far, there have been no words of support for Ukraine regarding the strike on its cultural heritage, for example, which has been labeled as military targets and so on. That's it. Well, nevertheless, we need to continue working with the American side. We'll see what the President of the United States has to say about this. And of course, the fact is that many European countries have already said that no one is planning to remove their embassies and so on. And the fact that they condemned the strikes with Oreshnik's ballistic missiles against Kyiv, this is the normal reaction of countries that respect international law and respect the fact that a country that exists and is a founding member of the United Nations has the right to somehow defend its interests. So in this context, a strong response from the United States of America would be good, but if it turns out to be weak, unfortunately, we are already used to that. Studio.
Regarding these Russian actions at the legislative level, which apparently allow them to act with even fewer restraints outside the borders of the Federation, Putin has essentially allowed the Russian army to protect Russians abroad. This is preparation for potential future escalations, something that, as you know, has been repeatedly discussed both within and outside the alliance, in the EU and in European and global media, that Putin might attack in one way or another NATO countries, EU countries, or specifically the Baltic states. Is this preparation for that? A legal basis for such a possibility, just in case?
Well, not just in case. He already has his own plans regarding this. Yesterday, Putin signed this decree. In 10 days, it comes into force. And what happens in 10 days? In 10 days, we have elections in Armenia. That's why I wrote an analytical piece and published it in 99 countries, explaining that Putin's threats about a Ukrainian scenario in Armenia are not just words. It's actually preparation for military intervention there. Moreover, right before the elections, specifically on the 6th, the night of the 6th, this could happen during the so-called Day of Silence. And this will be from the Ukrainian sub-point, the Crimean scenario, just like how they entered Crimea, quietly, cynically. Both Putin and the Kremlin leadership are preparing for this. Of course, all of this is being done very secretly. That's why we've raised quite a serious alarm saying that attention needs to be paid to Armenia. Right now, regarding Armenia, there isn't a single European Union country neighboring Armenia that could offer any help. And Putin is taking this into account. And right now, he needs some kind of victorious action that Russians would appreciate. After all, the Baltics would mean dealing with NATO and so on. So although NATO isn't particularly strong at the moment, it's still more complicated. He needs his first move to be very victorious and convincing. And that's why most likely it's Armenia. That is precisely why the complex issue of Armenia was formally brought up for discussion at the Council of Ministers meeting in Cyprus. It was because we proactively raised the alarm about it, since the situation on the ground there is truly not so simple or easily resolved as it might first appear. He is not just, so to speak, conducting some pro-Russian propaganda and so on, but may actually use military force. And we need to understand how they might get there, through which corridors, when this could happen, and so on. And the fact that Putin could already act from the 6th and the elections are on the 7th shows that this is not just a coincidence, this is a plan of action. And the more we talk openly about the fact that he is preparing a coup there, the fewer opportunities Putin will have to do all this quietly.